right, election fever starting to hit, really. Joining me live is the Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor. How are you? Thanks for joining me.
Good to be with you, Andrew.
Most important question of the day, I think. Will the Coalition support the funding announcement by the government on bulk billing this morning?
Well, Andrew, the important point here to start with is that this is necessary because of Labor's abject failure when it comes to health. What we have seen is a collapse in bulk billing rates from 88% when we were in government to 77%. A 45% increase in out-of-pockets being paid by people when they go to the doctor. 40 million bulk billing sessions that have disappeared since we were in government. And so people are feeling this because of Labor's failure. Their homegrown inflation
Is that a yes?
Well, I'll come to that. Their homegrown inflation has extended to health. Now, we're not going to get in the way of Labor cleaning up the mess that it has made. And it's important that that mess be cleaned up. What should have happened is we should have kept the gains or the benefits that we'd had when we were in government, that higher level of bulk billing, that lower level of out-of-pockets. But Labor's failed again. I mean, in sector after sector after sector, we see their failures.
Wow, I must admit I'm surprised. I mean, I thought the whole thing from you and Peter Dutton was fiscal restraints to go. We're going to spend a lot less. Here they are splashing all this cash to try and get re-elected, and you're saying, yeah, well, we're not going to stand in the way of that.
Well, we've opposed over $100 billion of unnecessary Labor spending in this term of Parliament, Andrew. There's no shortage of areas where we've said Labor spending is not appropriate. And there's a whole lot of frolics Labor's gone on, adding 36,000 Canberra-based public servants, investing in so-called manufacturing projects that are not in manufacturing whatsoever. We've said no to all of those things. But Labor has absolutely failed when it's come to delivering affordable health for Australians and getting access to the doctor, which is a huge challenge.
So you're saying they're just playing catch-up?
Well, they're playing catch-up. I mean, getting back to the numbers they're talking about is getting back to the numbers that we achieved when we were in government. And so this is Labor's failure. And this is how they fix it. I think there's a big question for them is where's the money going to come from, and we will work through that over the next little while. But I tell you what, we'll continue to oppose bad Labor spending proposals as we have throughout this term of Parliament.
This is a cost of living promise and leads to an inevitable question I keep asking for which there isn't a clear response from the opposition. Is it your and Peter Dutton's intention to promise further tax cuts at the election?
Well, we've already promised important tax reform over the past year or so. I mean, we have said that small business in particular needs to be put back in a place
where it can survive tax cuts,
and prosper. Well, we'll see what money's left. I mean, and this is the real challenge right now.
Well, you're just giving away $500 billion today.
Well, let's be clear, Andrew. We've opposed over $100 billion of unnecessary Labor government spending. Show me an opposition in recent history that has done that. You have to go back to Malcolm Fraser, who blocked supply. And
are you not going to promise income tax cuts? Well, after suggesting you would give some of the stage 3 back.
We will always look to reduce taxes. We won't be imposing unrealised capital gains tax on hard-working Australians, farmers and small business people who shouldn't be paying those taxes. We will be delivering accelerated depreciation to small businesses where we're seeing record levels of insolvencies.
Will you be promising income tax cuts?
Well, I'm not going to give you our election policies today, Andrew. I know you're going to ask me all morning, or for as long as we go through this interview to give you. But I'm not going to go through all of our election policies today. But what I will say is that we'll continue to manage Australians' tax revenues, the revenues we get from Australians, very carefully, as we have during this Parliament, as we've opposed over $100 billion of our Labor spending.
This health promise, can you see a lot more examples of this, maybe even on both sides, where someone promises something and in such a tight election race, the other side immediately says, me too?
I mean, this is cleaning up Labor's mess. I mean, we had bulk billing rates at 88% when we were in government. It's now down at 77%, and they're talking about taking it back to close to where it was when we were in government. I mean, this is all Labor is doing, is fixing their mess from their homegrown inflation, from their failures when it comes to health, and their failures when it comes to...
When was it at 88%?
When we were in government.
Well, in 2014 it was 82.5, then it was 84, then in 2019 it was 86.
It got up, it peaked at 88%.
Do you know when?
I haven't got the date in front of me, but it peaked at 88%.
But it was sort of 82.5 in 2014.
Yeah, and we increased it over the time we were in government. And this is exactly the point, Andrew, is Labor has failed on this. In the course of 2.5 years, they've taken it down to 77%. And we have seen Australians having to pay more in out-of-pockets, 45% increase in out-of-pockets. We've seen 40 million bulk billing sessions that have disappeared. And all Labor is doing is trying to get back to where it was when we were in government.
I'll tell you what else they're doing. They're bringing back something that's 10 years old, that infamous 2014 budget, where Peter Dutton was Health Minister and the government suggested at the time a co-payment, $5, $7, whatever it was, on every doctor's visit. Are you
suggesting that Labor is playing politics with this?
All I'm saying is, are you concerned that could hurt you, that narrative?
Well, I tell you what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the standard of living of Australians, Andrew, that has collapsed and unprecedented, unparalleled. We've never seen a collapse in Australian standard of living like we've seen in the last 2.5 years. Health has been part of that, but it's also been energy, it's been insurance, it's been increased personal income taxes being paid.
It's pretty bad. But what about when there were 17% interest rates and 11% unemployment?
Well,
that was a bit of a collapse in living standards.
Can I correct you on this? And this is incredibly important. The data goes right back to the 50s. We have never seen a collapse in real disposable income per person in Australia like we have seen in the last 2.5 years. Never. And I should add to that, no other peer country has seen this collapse in standard of living. That's what Labor has done to Australians. We simply can't afford another 3 years of this.
Well, there's been higher inflation and interest rates elsewhere, but notwithstanding that, the Reserve Bank cut rates during the week. Did you support that decision?
Can I just, your comment at the end there, this is incredibly important. Standard of living is what matters. It's what your income can buy. And the truth is that Australian standard of living has never seen what it's seen in the last 2.5 years.
What's the measure?
Real disposable income per person. And worse than that, Andrew,
yeah, but who's
we're not going to see the standard of living we had when Labor came to power until 2031, according to the Reserve Bank. So this is the disaster that's happening.
The Reserve Bank cut rates. Do you agree with that decision?
I'm not going to get into commentary on the Reserve Bank. I never do. But what I will say is that inflation has been too high for too long in this country. Core inflation has been high.
So you're not going to say you support that decision?
Well, I'm not going to get into Reserve Bank commentary. I don't. I never have. But I will say that core inflation...
It sounds like you don't think they should have cut rates.
I just never make comments on the Reserve Bank decisions, and nor should politicians, in my view. What I will say is that core inflation has been too high for too long, that Labor's homegrown inflation has contributed to that, that Labor hasn't taken the right steps to make it easy for the Reserve Bank to bring inflation and interest rates down earlier, and the result is our standard of living has collapsed. And the average Australian family with a mortgage in this country has paid an extra $50,000 in interest payments, Andrew. $50,000 in interest payments over and above where they were before Labor came to power, since Labor came to power.
Do you think, as the markets do, we'll see more rate cuts this year?
Again, I'm not going to get into commentary on the Reserve Bank. But I'll say this, I will say this, is that the context within which the Reserve Bank makes its decisions is incredibly important, and in particular, the government's policies. If the government doesn't have a focus on productivity, if the government thinks the only way to grow the economy is to grow the population, if the government wants to keep spending at the rate that it has, and as I say, we've opposed over $100 billion of that spending, then it is incredibly difficult for any Reserve Bank to bring down inflation and interest rates at the pace that people want. And we have seen Australia at the back of the pack in bringing down rates compared to the US, the UK, Canada, New Zealand.
Their rates were higher. But the fact underlying inflation is down to nearly 3% and unemployment's just 4%, that's good news, isn't it? Finally.
Well, you know, prices aren't coming down, Andrew. And this is incredibly important. Inflation is the change in prices. Prices continue to go up. And core inflation is still above the target range.
Do you want deflation?
Well, no, I'm saying that core inflation is above the target range. It's too high and prices continue to go up.
Well, the forecast suggests it'll be under, and it's pretty much on the 3% now.
You know what? The government's forecasts haven't been reliable. They
thought
the
banks.
They thought, let's talk about the bank's forecast. The bank's forecast is that it's going to take till 2031 2031, for Australia's standard of living to get back to where it was when Labor came to power. That's the government's plan in action. That is where we're at right now. We have to accelerate that, and it does mean sensible policies on driving productivity, on making sure we clean up our construction sector, on getting affordable, reliable energy into our system, on financial services and making sure people have access to affordable loans. All of these things are absolutely essential if we're going to make sure that we get our standard of living back to where it was when we're in power.
And cutting spending. So what are you planning to cut if you hit office? Would you look at introducing efficiency dividends for public service departments? Because that is something to make sure the federal public service actually does cut when a minister asks them to.
Yeah, and Labor's added 36,000 Canberra-based public servants. We've said that's too many. We've said it should be under 200,000. We'll say more about the details of that.
Efficiency dividends, are they on the table?
Well, we'll say more about the details of that as we get closer to the election. The election hasn't been called yet. We've been unambiguous in saying that addition in public servants is inappropriate. We don't want to cut essential services, but we do think adding bureaucracy is not appropriate.
Could you cut 36,000?
Well, I'm not going to give you the number today. We've been clear that it'll be under 200,000. But what I will say is that you don't strengthen the economy. You don't make sure you beat inflation and boost growth by adding bureaucracy. We need to build businesses, not building bureaucracy, and that's what we've seen under Labor.
What's your view of the government's subsidy of Whyalla steelmaking?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of details we haven't seen on this. We've been very clear that we don't think putting money into the green hydrogen project that Chris Bowen's been on about since forever is appropriate. That's not how taxpayer money should be spent. We want steel making, but we think that's a completely unrealistic time frame for green hydrogen to be part of that steel making process. And so there's another bit of government spending that we think is inappropriate at this time. What we do want to see is steel making survive and prosper in this country. That is important, Andrew. And we'll continue to look at options to do that. What we don't think the right answer is for the government to run the steel mill. We've got a Prime Minister who can't run a government, let alone a steel.
But you want to run a 7 nuclear power stations. That's your own big government spend on industry. Peter Dutton indicated in recent remarks that after a time these nuclear power plants could be privatised. Is that the coalition plan?
Yeah, right now our focus is on getting affordable, reliable energy into the system. In the short term, it'll be gas. We know we've got to get more gas into the system alongside the record level.
And eventually you want to build 7 nuclear power plants.
And the base load zero emissions power we get from nuclear power stations are part of our policy, Andrew. And
would they eventually be privatised?
Well, I'm not going to get into. We've been clear that these will be publicly built, and that will deliver a return on investment, and that's all been part of our budgeting for the nuclear power stations.
But eventually they could be privatised.
Again, our focus is on publicly built nuclear power stations. Look, utilities are different to other parts of the economy. They always have been.
Where are you getting the hundreds of billions for that?
Well, let's be clear. This is out to the 2030s.
Borrowing?
And this is investment. This is not on-budget spending. So It's very different, Andrew.
You certainly criticise them for off-budget spending. Now, what will it say if, as expected, the government decides to go to an election before delivering a budget?
Look, who knows? I mean, what goes on inside Anthony Albanese's head as he's thinking about when to decide on election? Well, the one thing I know is he'll focus on the politics. What we do know from their past budgets is that there's red ink as far as the eye can see, and no doubt there will be in this one. So does he want to reveal that again to the Australian people? I'm not sure. That's a question for him. But what I do know, Andrew, is if we get another 3 years of Labor, we'll continue to see the economic mismanagement we've seen in this 3 years, and Australians have paid a high price for that.
Briefly, do you think Jim Chalmers should deliver an economic statement if he doesn't deliver a budget?
Well, I do think he's got to clarify a number of the issues in his agenda that we don't know the answers to. I mean, of the $110 billion of spending we've opposed, how much of it has he spent? How much of it has he spent? Yeah. What's happened with the contingency fund? I mean, how much of this health announcement has already been budgeted for and how much is not? We don't know the answer to those questions. There's a lot of government spending that we don't know about.
Right.
We don't know how he's going to pay for all these extra public servants a couple of years out.
Speaking of spending, your policy of a tax break on work lunches for small to medium business, how much do you believe it will cost the budget? Well, because the government says over $1 billion.
Well, the government is making this stuff up. I mean, really, honestly, it's pathetic. And
well, it's Treasury, right?
Well, except it's clear that the government was seeking to politicise the Treasury. The government asked Treasury to model coalition policy. You know that is a complete breach.
Well, how much does it cost?
Well, we've been clear that it'll be under $250 million, and we'll come out with the detailed costings for that and everything else in the lead up to the election. And we don't know when the election's even going to be.
Just lunch, Andrew. Not golf?
It's been clear. It's been clear all along. This is focused on meals. That's the focus.
Can't play golf first. OK, I wanted to ask it finally, sorry, on a serious note, about these Chinese live firing exercises between Australia and New Zealand. The government doesn't seem too concerned, although Penny Wong has spoken to Wang Yi about it. They seem concerned about the notice as opposed to the practice. What's your reaction?
Oh, well, I just think they're not standing up for their national interest. I mean, there needs to be mutual respect in these relationships, and that's about more than just notice. I mean, saying you need notice for someone to sit off your coast and engage in gunboat diplomacy, which is exactly what's happened here. I mean, that's completely unacceptable. And the government needs to say that very clearly. I mean, look, it's important we have the best possible relationship we can with China. There is no doubt about that. But it has to be in the context of mutual respect. And what's happened here and what's been happening in recent days, more generally, with the flaring we saw a week ago or so, is not within a relationship of mutual respect.
Angus Taylor, thanks so much for your time.
Good to be with you, Andrew.